I just want to hear what you had to say about dogs and Asperger's.
Yeah, well, we're just starting. I just wait for people to come in. We are in several groups. And tell me a little bit about yourself.
I've worked with people with developmental disabilities, including Asperger and autism, for probably the last 20 years or so.
Good.
I started in working in a workshop with adults, teaching them basic skills, and then I was a counselor at a counseling center for 10 years. And now I do a little bit of consulting on the side and developing training programs across a variety of topics.
That's awesome.
I'm working on a abuse awareness program right now.
That's good. Yeah. So what is your experience with children?
I've worked with probably, in my counseling, I started around 5 or 6 years of age all the way on up. So people that were mainly people who had severe behavior problems. A lot of them were labeled as autistic, more low functioning, what we now would be called low functioning autism, with the new classification. And then a lot of teenagers, which would be more of the Asperger's.
Yeah.
So,
could you see a combination of emotional trauma as a child that would lead to Asperger's? Do you see that connection?
I see the trauma not leading to Asperger's, but happening frequently to people with Asperger's.
Okay, so there is a precondition as Asperger's that leads to easier getting trauma.
Oh, but much easier. So that's when that's probably one of the first things. Recently, I've been looking a lot at the trauma literature on regular trauma. And I see a lot of similarities between people with Asperger's who are exhibiting challenging behaviors and people in the regular population who have been traumatized. So there's a lot of similarities.
Okay. So what comes first, the trauma or Asperger's?
Asperger's comes first.
Okay. So how do you determine in children? I have to step back a little bit. So my question, I will still listen because I'm remotely here on my speaker. I have to take a dog out.
Okay.
What is your opinion about how to pre-classify children that cannot speak, to classify them? Do we are suspicious on Asperger's or not?
With the children who don't speak, that depends upon their speak is just one aspect of functioning. So many times if they don't speak, they may not be, they'd be more low functioning. So they would be more what we would call traditional autistic, I think, than Asperger's. The Asperger's have pretty good communication skills usually.
Everybody else. Okay. Everybody else. Okay. So I had to switch dogs. They don't know that I'm having a webinar. So we have already a few questions here, and I see Silent Seizure as trauma does not cause Asperger's or autism based on research. This is correct. And Martina is asking about emotional trauma. Okay, and Silent Seizure replies basically any kind of trauma. So what I've seen with dogs, seeing that from a trauma perspective, that dogs' trauma and children trauma have parallel levels up to age 16. And having, okay, Silent Seizure wants to go on air, and she wants to add her input. Hi, Jess.
Hi. I have Asperger's.
Good.
So I thought I would weigh in.
Good.
And I
okay.
I wanted to add, because you were talking about speech, as a requirement of diagnosis, children and adults who are diagnosed with Asperger's do not have speech delays or cognitive delays. That is part of the requirement for the diagnosis.
Martin.
I agree.
Okay.
Asperger's is basically doesn't have any communication delays.
Mm-hmm. So let's note that. What I try to do here, I want to have a parallel world between dogs with disabilities. Not dog, it's a wrong correction. Dogs that I suspect have disabilities and humans who have this Asperger's, and see if we have something parallel to hold on. Because right now, there is not such literature that can define how dogs can be connected with Asperger's. They don't accept that part. Few veterinarians can see that combination, and maybe 1% of trainers have heard about that, but I'm not sure that's out there in the world that says, guys, when you do a dog training and you see you struggle with a dog, think about checking in with Asperger's and see if we have something going on there. So I made a list of situations that I could find are similar to children, and I will read that through at some point if you're interested. And I want you guys tell me if there's something, if I'm leading on something here. So the first part is the emotions and sensitivities. And the first thing that I saw here is we have an emotional incident that can determine the mood of the day. So for example, the dog got scared in the morning for any reason, it will last the whole day long. It takes like a while to calm down. The second thing that I saw is becoming overwhelmed with too much verbal directions. If we take out for a dog and we are very organized, we want him to sit and stay and heel and calm and down, and then I would see a disconnect and the dog getting confused at some point, overwhelmed with that commands. Am I good for now?
Yeah, and I think number two, especially, I can absolutely agree, and that is something I talk to my boss about all the time. Mm-hmm. Is she'll give me 15 directions to follow, and I have to tell her, hang on a minute.
Whoa.
Let's try to simplify this and, make this a bit easier for me. So I will agree with that.
The next thing, number three, that I saw is calmed by external stimulation. Soothing sound, brushing, playing with a toy, that I could see a dog will calm down. But I saw it that the dog himself cannot calm down. You have to add something in addition to help him calm down. How does it sound?
Yeah, I agree. It is in the autism world, that is called stimming, and that's the rocking, or like I have a little makeup brush that I have, and I'll just kind of play with the brush. You'll see some kids kind of doing this to their face. So yeah, that's a parallel.
Okay. So what else do we have? The next thing I saw here is desires comfort items. I saw dogs who will chew on a blanket, they will chew on a ball constantly. They have to have something in their mouth and chewing. Sometimes it's a squeaky toy, but I'm not sure about the squeaky toy because it has an action-reaction, and some dogs like that. But definitely chewing on pillows, chewing on toys constantly. Like, I love my ball and I chew all the time. And you have also these back eyes, like, oh, I can really enjoy that all the time. How does it sound?
Well, I think, I don't know that I agree 100% with that one. I think it partially falls into the previous one with the outside calming item, but also there could be a little bit of OCD there. So I don't know that that's really an exact parallel.
Well, the differential is that the outside like the external stimulus to calm dogs down would be more that the dog cannot access to. He cannot switch on the radio, or he cannot get something that he can do for himself. And something that he desires is something that he can pick up on his own and calm himself down, like a toy or a chew toy. Okay. So the fifth is difficulties with loud or sudden sounds. For example, dogs usually will bark, but excessively bark on certain noises. Like why is he barking like that crazy? It was just a squeaky thing or whatever. The sixth one was emotions can pass very suddenly or are drawn out of a long period of time. So emotions, I mean, the dog gets upset about the situation. He gets very attracted to that. It could last very short time. For example, come pet me. Okay, now I'm done. Let me go. Or come pet me and I don't stop licking you forever. Okay. Martin, do you see that in children too? Like this very short touch and go, or very long stay and hug forever?
I see that some of the time. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I think Asperger's is a misnomer in your dog showing. I mean, you'd think it would be more autistic-like characteristics, and not Asperger's. But also, I think it would be more, because I see a lot of behavior problems are related to trauma. I think it would be they're showing a lot of traumatized behaviors, which are similar in some ways. So a lot of it, I think, might be due to the trauma that they've had. I don't know whether I don't think you would be able to say their dog is born with autism,
Yeah.
But a dog can be traumatized and show a lot of those same behaviors.
Correct. So I think I was trying to find a borderline where trauma ends and the precondition exists. And this is the line that I need to reach, because I see many dogs. Okay, we have somebody who wants to call in again, and that's Sophie. She's from Canada. And she has also something to add here while I'm continuing. Well, Martina asked a question, why not chemical imbalance in the dog head? Well, Asperger's is basically a chemical imbalance.
No, I don't agree with that.
Here, Martin?
Well, I don't. Yeah, let Jess talk. I
don't agree that Asperger's is a chemical imbalance. It's more that your brain is wired differently. Your neural pathways communicate a little bit differently and fire somewhat differently than a neurotypical person's. But I don't know if there's research on it. I'll take a look and see, if there's some research out there on it. But I don't have a chemical imbalance. So I don't think it's a chemical imbalance that causes it.
Well, what I understand is that you have a neurological. Okay, I think I hear Sophie in the background.
Yeah, we're
Ossie has
got
okay.
audio.
Ossie, come up.
No visual.
Okay. So you want to talk, Sophie?
Wayne has something to talk about. Wayne is not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Asperger's as well, and my oldest son has. Why is there an echo?
I don't know.
Anyway, my oldest son has Asperger's, and one of the things. Is there a way to turn this echo off?
No.
Can you hear me now? So
yeah, I can hear you now.
I'll just have to talk while this echo for someone who's Asperger's. It's kind of difficult. So I have a 25-year-old son with Asperger's. I have Asperger's myself, and one of the things I'm hearing is that there's a difficulty in coming to some sort of conclusive determination whether a pet or a dog could have autism or Asperger's. And that's kind of a tricky subject because when it comes to having your child diagnosed, it overlaps with so many other conditions from ADHD. So then how do you tease that away with a child who can be, has verbal skills and other ways that you can communicate? How do you then determine? I'm not saying that a dog can, but it would be uniquely challenging to tease those symptoms away and prove that it was Asperger's. And I agree. There's not enough known to say it's Asperger's is a chemical imbalance. It's certainly a different use of your brain and its various lobes, and some kind of take over. But it's an interesting topic.
The reason why I believe it, I'm not a scientist, and I'm just going from an energy healer perspective as a Reiki. I feel that it basically based on the DNA, and that modifying the DNA or reinforcing the brain to produce something that it doesn't have in the right amount will be able to change that intensity of either ADD, autistic spectrum disorders, or possibly even mental illnesses. Okay? Because I have ADD on myself, diagnosed by a very well-known doctor in US. I didn't know that I have, but people made me aware of that, and I struggled for many years, even in school, and I basically lost many years of learning because nobody did recognize that. So it was really, really a relief to know that I'm not crazy, and I don't know why I'm going to the shopping center and don't remember why I went in.
So Roman,
but I
hear what you. Sorry to interrupt. What I'm hearing is something that perhaps Jess can comment on as well. It's really important. The fundamentally important part of interacting with either a dog with Asperger's or a human is acceptance. And without acceptance and just appreciation for the dog, human, who they are, you cannot get any further than
that. Can you repeat that again, please?
Acceptance. When you're looking at a dog or a human or anyone with ADD, Asperger's, or lower functioning autistic spectrum disorder, the number one thing is acceptance. They don't want to be changed; they want to be accepted.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, where I've seen that the most is at work and the different places I've worked. I was a contractor for 4 or 5 years, so I worked at several different companies. And in the beginning, they try to get you into this very rigid, square block goes in a square hole. But they very quickly learned with me that that's not going to work for me, and they accepted me. And that was the most important thing. Don't try to change me. I am who I am. If you try to change me, I'm probably going to have some kind of meltdown at some point. And I do find with my dogs and the dogs that I work with, we need to accept them for who they are and what they are capable of. Whether they are a perfectly stable dog or a dog that may have some kind of behavior or mental challenge.
I agree. What do you think, Martin?
I agree. I'd like to bring up it doesn't necessarily be dogs only, but I think, all creatures in the animal kingdom, will exhibit some of those behaviors. And my experience has been more with horses. And I'd raised horses, and I've had horses in the country, and I've actually had a number, when I was working in a high school, I had a number of my students with autism to go up for horseback riding, there's a special bond of how they and the horses got along, and things they could do with the horses that nobody else could do without getting kicked or anything. But the other thing is, a lot of the horse behaviors I saw were very, very similar to the autistic behaviors I was seeing in the students I was bringing up. So I think it cuts across. All animals have emotions, so we still, these hypersensitivities, these ritualized behaviors, a lot of the OCD types of behaviors. You see those in horses an awful lot, and how they'll spook at something strange in their environment, and how they are really routinized in a lot of ways. So I think it cuts across, the whole animal kingdom. So and in each animal, there's variation among species. So in each species, there's a lot of variation. That's why some people have autism, other people have high anxiety. The same thing with any of the other animals, and especially probably dogs, because dogs have been domesticated through so many centuries to live and interact with humans. But I'm sorry, I have to go now. I have another meeting. But I was really enjoyed talking with you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. All right. Bye-bye.
So thank you very much, Martin. He's gone. So Martina is complaining. He's like, can we talk about whatever? So Martina, you want to hop here? She's thinking about it. So I would like to put something out there, just a thought. And I'm thinking it's really like, I dare say that animals that have a very sensitive emotional state are similar to children who have a low emotional state. So we have an overlapping here. So if we would increase the intensity of an emotional awareness of dogs, we will reach an autistic child with a low emotional level. And we could say it's basically act the same. The way they perceive emotions, the way they interact themselves with the environment and esoteric stimulus is pretty much the same that dogs do. What do you think, Jess? And Wayne?
Well, I have a question. I think it kind of ties into this, to do with the difference between being alone and being lonely.
I didn't hear the difference.
So for someone with Asperger syndrome, alone is sometimes a choice. It's preferable to being in a very uncomfortable social situation, or perhaps you're ostracized because you say the wrong thing or act the wrong way. But they suffer an incredible amount of loneliness. And I have my 25-year-old son, I think, could be true for anybody, for any creature who's experiencing some sort of autism spectrum. When at that point he was in great form, and he came home to me and he said, "Dad, it's like I'm carrying a sack full of loneliness around every day. It just keeps getting heavier and heavier."
I have really hard time hearing you.
There's a lot of misperception in some of the public that the wanting to be away is because they don't need to be with anyone, because there is an incredible amount of loneliness.
That was really hard to hear. I had a very hard time hearing.
No, do I need to repeat?
Your audio is
you
kind of
can
going
stay, but
in and out.
Yeah, we have any, so it's hard for us to
Let me turn the volume down on this computer.
okay. Maybe we have
that
something background running. Can you talk now?
Is that better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay.
I can hear.
So the difference I was trying to describe was between loneliness and being alone, either by choice or because of being ostracized, or having to remove yourself from a continually uncomfortable situation. And then the story, which is hard for me to repeat because it was hard to listen to then. It's hard to kind of feel now. But at the time, he was in grade 4. He's now 25. He came home and he said to me, "Dad, he came from home or from school, and he said, Dad, it's like I've been carrying this sack full of loneliness around every day at school, and it gets heavier and heavier, and I don't know what to do about it."
So sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's rough.
On the other hand, you know, it may be a reality, but with acceptance from the people who do know, right, and not constantly trying to change the person or the dog, that loneliness is greatly diminished. And as they get older and more comfortable in more situations, it's not as heavy as it sounds.
Yeah, that's really hard to deal with. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's tough.
So what did you do to counterfight the loneliness of your child?
Well, you just continually offer a very supportive environment. And it really comes from, like, there's so many behaviors that can come up, and you just have to stop. You have to be more patient. And I think this would be true for a dog, right? If you have to repeat something 100 times or 1,000 times for the dog or the person or child to actually remember it and make it a part of your daily living, don't be angry about it. Just know that you're going to have to be very repetitious. Okay. That's one example.
What else?
Well, you have to come from a place of love and acceptance, because there are so many things that come up, especially as the child is young and really doesn't understand why this is happening and can't control. I think the other thing that's good about Asperger end of the autism spectrum is that you can learn behaviors, you can learn social cues, you can learn that. It takes time, and it comes natural to neurotypical people, right? I prefer to use the word neurotypical, but for someone with Asperger's, it's just constantly having to remember the right behavior. You know, just something simple as a smile. If someone says something, that's a good news or something, you know, Asperger person might have to just think about smiling because they're not smiling at them when they hear that.
Okay. So do you think that do you think that people with Asperger's have hard time associating experience or emotional experience that has a short-term memory effect? Like, how do I feel right now driving a car with the memory that sits in the past? How did I felt last time driving a car? Is there a disconnect? Do I have to experience every time from the beginning how to drive a car and how it feels like? And if I have enough input at some point, it feels like always.
So I would say I know some people with Asperger's who do feel like that.
Okay.
I was just talking to somebody I know in the UK who has Asperger's and who has recently learned to drive, and recently, probably like in the last year. But yes, for him, it's like a new experience every time. For me, it's not. And I think something like that will vary from person to person. You know, and I remember even the very first time I got in the car with my father to teach me how to drive, and it was nothing. It was just, this is what I do today.
Okay.
So I think it depends on the individual.
Okay. Good, because I just want to capture these differences. Because I see dogs, you tell him to sit and everything is fine, and then he forgets about it and he's doing something else, and you ask him back to sit, and he's like, oh yeah, right, I was sitting. And then he walks away, and you call him back, and he's like, oh, I left. Yeah, well, I know, I have to sit. And he comes back to sit again. And it's all over again. And you tell him like 100 times, you know, we open the door, we sit. And he's like, oh, really? Yeah. So do you see that kind of situation?
Sometimes it depends on the task.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if it's not something I'm particularly interested in, yes, that will happen to me. Where if it's not an interest of mine, if it's something that's boring, and especially if it's an activity that's not an interest and requires me to sit still, I will actually just kind of space out and wander off. But if it's something that I have an interest in, or if it's something where it keeps me moving physically, I won't. So I do see that connection there.
Okay, to resume, so we say based on the interest of dogs, with the task they do, they can more or less remember the task.
Yeah,
Basically,
and you know,
according
to draw another,
go ahead.
to draw another parallel, if there's a task I'm not particularly interested in that I have to do or have to learn and I have to sit still,
Mm-hmm.
but if you tell me for every minute I sit there, you're going to give me some baked Cheetos, I will sit there for a year because I love baked Cheetos. That is my super high value reward. So
to repeat
you know,
again,
that
based on the interest of the dog and based on the drive we can keep alive, we can keep the dog occupied in that particular task. And as soon as that disappears, the memory is lost and we go back to reset.
So if I may ask a question on that topic and in part to Jess, when, I'm just going to turn the computer volume down here so I don't get the echo. So when I want to learn or want to remember something that I know that I'm not interested in, I will write it down. I'll write it down because I know that because I'm not interested in it. So for a human, they can do that. For a dog, I don't know what the strategy would be. If I can tell one story that may illustrate, because there is such a huge spectrum, not every person with Asperger's presents exactly the same way. But I went to many lectures from Asperger experts. One was doing groundbreaking work 15 years ago in Michigan. And what she did was she would take an autistic child, a teenager, for example, and she would videotape the child in class. Now, this is something that's a little bit cruel, but it happens in every classroom. So the Asperger child quite often is raising the hand, always wanting to be, imparting the information for class. She would videotape the teenager and then play back afterwards and ask the teenager what was going through his mind. So when the class was laughing. Now, he in his mind, they were just laughing with him like he had said something funny. So when she said to him, no, they're laughing at you, and this is why, and this is what you could do to prevent that. Now, that is not going to be an ability of that Asperger teenager to remember. So his immediate response was, I better write that down, that's important. So now what could you do with a dog that doesn't have as complicated social cues or verbal skills, language?
So I think my dog actually has Asperger's. And so it's delayed. I can't tell who's talking.
Are you on mute, Roman?
Okay. It's delayed. So Slinky, the way Slinky calms himself down is he has to get in bed and under the covers. and he gets so overstimulated and like he can't focus. And he is also extremely affectionate. He has to get very, 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 very close to me to calm down. And he has a thing outside where he sees a person and he goes totally in overdrive, nothing you've ever seen in a dog. And it's challenging, extremely challenging. It's like you have a dog with a disability, and it's emotional, it's hard. He basically is a put-down case. He's a freak. I've worked very, very hard with him. Well, yeah, that's what it is. I mean, children we love, and dogs in the shelters with that behavior get put down. And I choose to just get him from the kill shelter in Brownsville and love him. So, but he has coping mechanisms that none of my other dogs have. And they look at him sometimes when he goes in that freak behavior, and they just stand there. It's like, what the heck's wrong with you?
So Jess, question. Can you please repeat what Wayne said, because you kind of more associate with that? What was exactly going on with the video, and what was the response of the child? I didn't understand that part.
Oh, so with the video, this was research that was done. I'm trying to remember. I have that fish like 3-second memory thing, but Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong. So with the video, the kid presented some information to the class, and the class laughed. And in the child's mind, they were laughing with him. And the researcher said to the child, "No, they were laughing at you, and here's what you can do to prevent that from happening in the future." And the child said, "Let me write that down because that's going to be important." So I think the question was, as humans, we have the ability to say, "Let me write that down so I remember it." But dogs can't do that. So what do we do for dogs to help them?
So my answer to that would be positive reinforcement. Reproducing the scenario again and again and adding positive reinforcement if the action is appropriate. So instead of correction and creating more confusion, where the dog basically gets in that state, so stressed, and we go back to the first few points that I mentioned before, too much information would shut the dog down. Instead of giving him more information, giving him specific tasks. If you do that, you get this. And it's a different level to be stored. So if I take here my dog as a sample, and we humans, everything that we memorize goes here. The dogs do not all go here. They've been processed here, but then later they go back and be stored in the back spine as a reflex. Okay, so since some behaviors are stored between fear and dare, and the brain will be processed these two information and combine them and make them a project. When the dog goes into that memory lack, I have to repeat it again and again, the same thing, the same conditions, so that memory moves back here, because the brain cannot store it. It doesn't have the capacity to store it. So I make it a reflex. So I can call it back again if the dog comes in the same situation. So for example, he wrote it down by writing it down, it being stored in a different important, okay? The important was the important path. So Wayne said, because it was important, I have to write it down. That increased the value of importance. For the child, that was important. For the dog, important is when it's become stored as a reflex. Everything else is temporary memory, and I don't need it. I don't care if the ball that I just played was red or green. What's your?
Can I ask a question about that? Mm-hmm. When you say stored as a reflex, do you mean muscle memory? Or I don't quite understand what you mean by stored as a reflex.
Well, you call it muscle memory, but muscles are not controlled by themselves. They have a center let's say, external memory that is stored in the spine. So the brain will give stimulus as a project. We are going for a walk. And the sub-memory will distribute the information according to the sequence. Door equals that. Open door equals that. Dog outside of the door equals that. And the muscle memory reacts to that path. So the dog can handle more situations in a short amount of time without doing all this back and forth of information flow. The reason why I got with that idea is because we struggle the same thing when we do industrial automation. We have very limited capacity of memory, and every memory is very expensive. So in order to do mechanical work, for example, pulling out an arm, grabbing something and going back again, I have so much information process, and pretty much like a dog, that I can only do thing if one thing happened. So I cannot grab something if I didn't reach there, and I cannot pull it back if I didn't grab it. So we as human, theoretically, we can do the process without having the reference point. A machine needs a reference point because I cannot time travel. I can't be in a place I've never been. And a dog has the same thing. He cannot imagine what is behind the closed door. He knows there's something behind the door, but he cannot imagine it. There is no imagination. But he can expect, according to his experience, what will most likely be the case to be behind the door that makes that noise. So that memory is not stored in the head. That memory is stored in the body, somewhere. I call it in the spine because, from my experience, is that where the information can be stored as energy. Because in the muscles, stored energy will be consumed, but not stored. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Can I talk about positive reinforcement for a minute?
Yes.
So I did get a lot of help from child psychiatrists and psychologists to better help myself and my son. And one thing that probably should ring true for all people and all dogs, but isn't, is that positive reinforcement is the one and only thing that will work for someone with Asperger syndrome. It's very clear that if someone with autism is met with aggressive, angry, upset behavior, it's just going to get veered right back, and they're going to become even more intense. In addition to it just not mattering, if someone's perseverating over an issue and they just can't let go, punishing them for it is never going to take their loop, their feedback loop, and holding them in that perseverating situation. The only thing that you can do is use positive reward to bring them out of that. And I think that, I guess that's my point, but it's a really important point.
I have a question here. So when a person with Asperger's is in that absolute emotion, like they're so overwhelmed by that emotion, Schlenke doesn't even, take anything positive. He would bite the hand with a hot dog. It is so severe that I have now one mechanism where Roman taught him look, and so he looks at me and I say, sit quickly. And that's an ingrained, I've done that from day one, sit, sit, sit. He can't down, that's not even in his language yet. But he sits, but he still starts shaking and starts like shivering, and that nothing positive works at that point. We just have to either wait it out or
absolutely. Waiting it out is one thing you have to do.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. For me, and like Wayne said, no two people on the Asperger's spectrum are the same. Mm-hmm. For me, when I get to that point, I have to be left alone. I have to go to a quiet place. Sometimes in, my version of a kind of pillow fort under the blankets, whatever. But, and I noticed that with one of my dogs is She just needs to be left alone. She needs that time to let it go and calm down. And then she'll get to a point, I'll get to a point where I can interact with someone else. But yeah, you have to wait it out, and you have to give them a safe place to do that, a nice quiet place where nobody's going to poke their head in and check on them, and nobody's going to touch them, and just go chill out. When you're ready, come back.
Yeah, he puts himself there. He has a nice little bathroom, and none of the other dogs goes in there. They somehow sense it and then know. I leave him alone when he gets to that point. But it's just hard to watch. And hearing this about children, I can fully understand it. It's just hard. You know, you see your other dogs being happy, and then you see your one dog like trying to play with him. They look at him like, your language is off. We don't even know if you want to play. You're weird. You're growling at us, but you think you're playing. I mean, it's just
that's
weird.
Recess,
you know?
For every child with Asperger's, that is recess.
Yeah, terrible. It's hard. It hurts. I mean, it makes me crazy because now I'm starting to understand what that maybe is.
So can I put a positive spin on this?
Yeah.
So the beauty of some Asperger adults and children, and yeah, I don't have a dog with Asperger, so I don't know. But the beauty of some people with Asperger is that we live so in the moment. And my son was the perfect example of that. The world could have ended for him in that moment, but he's had his quiet time. He's done whatever he's needed to stimulate himself. And then he's back, and he is living in the moment, and he doesn't care as long as now is good.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. And, you know, Martina, with your dog, you're saying it's so hard to watch. It's probably harder for you than it is for the dog. Because like people with Asperger's, dogs live in the moment. They don't forget the past. It's not like it's gone and wiped from their memory banks, and they're not thinking about tomorrow. But, you know, I think, you know, for parents of children with Asperger's, for owners of dogs like Slinky, it's probably a lot harder on you than it is on them. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, he's a happy guy. He just, the people around him are not, because he tends to attack when he goes in that flip mode. And my dogs know him. And with fosters, I have to be extremely careful. In general, the foster will pick up on the weird behavior and just ignore it if they don't have any other triggers. So he's my last dog to put in there, because I know he has that weirdness. And I call it in dogs weirdness because I don't have a name for it yet. You know, it's just different. It's like different behaviors.
I like the term non-neurotypical.
Non-neurotypical? Yeah, that's a good term.
Yes. That's in dogs we say weird, right? And that's probably not a good way, because that gets them put down in the shelter.
Yeah, and you know, and I would say, and I don't have children. Wayne, you can weigh in here, but I think that to a point, managing the environment and managing a situation is helpful, because you know when it's going to be too much for your dog, and you can remove your dog at that point. And I mean, I don't know if that's something that would be done for a child also, but you're not going to throw your child into the middle of 30 screaming children at a roller skating party.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what's called setting your child up for failure.
Okay. Let's ask a question here. So we have the condition that dogs with Asperger's live in the moment. We define that. And once that moment they got arousal about passes, they come back to the normal, which is correct.
Well, can I ask a question or make a clarification on that?
Mm-hmm.
All dogs live in the moment. all dogs
Correct.
get excited and then come back to normal. I think it's the amount of time it takes to come back to normal, feeling normal. And I mean, as for living in the moment, I feel that most animals do that, not just dogs. You know, I've worked with a lot of different species of animals. I worked at a zoo, and except for the ones that are much higher in intelligence, like primates and elephants, they pretty much all live in the moment. But I think it's that getting excited and being able to calm down, that time. A neurotypical dog can settle like that. A non-neurotypical dog is going to need some help and some quiet time.
Yeah, not can't settle that way. Can't settle like my other dogs. Has to have special help in settling, but he's smart enough to put himself away, which is amazing. He will remove himself from all the other dogs, from all the trauma, and he will go into the bathroom and he will stay there until he's calm. It's amazing. I mean, it's like they self.
See, now I wish I could do that without people saying I'm a standoffish bee.
So to repeat that, because we want to grab things and kind of make them facts. So dogs with Asperger's live in the more in the moment than other dogs, and they struggle intensely, but to control the duration of the excitement, either too short or too long. This is correct.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, we got that.
Yep.
Okay.
I believe it's correct.
So what else do we struggle here? We struggle to identify emotional feedback from others or emotional space, like going close, like, hi, I love you, and like, whoa, easy, stay back. How?
Yeah, like Slinky has this thing where he takes Jesse's, like he puts his mouth completely over Jesse's head, and he's and it's like play for him, but it's completely aggressive for any other dog but Jessie. I mean, she's like, yeah, you're doing your thing. I'm gonna do this for 3 minutes. I love you, but it's really weird. And so it's really aggressive. So any foster that comes in, he does it to bites back. So I really have to monitor him, let them watch it first with Jessie. So yeah, he's doing something that isn't appropriate to the other dog. That is, is
that a matter of not learning appropriate social behavior during those key first few months of life? Is that just not having an adult dog around to show that puppy what is and is not appropriate play?
I agree.
So if that would be the case, we could fix that in play.
Not necessarily. Some dogs, if they don't have that, if they don't learn that appropriate play, some dogs will always retain a piece of that. And when they get super excited, will kind of forget themselves.
So I would add to that what Jess said, that you have dogs who have a trauma in that case, not being proper socialized, which is a trauma. Okay, it's a missing information that should be there, but it's not. If you can fix that before week 16, you basically solve the problem. If you cannot fix it week 16 because you got the dog later, and you can fix it before the 18th month, you will fix it as much as possible, but you will still have leftovers. And I think after age of 18 months, you really struggle for the dog to eliminate completely that issue.
Yeah, so I got him when he was 8 months old. So he was with other dogs, and he should have. I mean, all my other fosters that come in kind of weird or anything with under-socialized, I can fix that in playgroup when they're that age. But he just never fixed, and I'm like, so I couldn't explain what it is.
It's a combination of trauma and difficulties. So we're going back to the phase that dogs with Asperger's have trouble into that memory structure to do things appropriate again and again and again. So if that missing link misses in the beginning, they even struggle more later. This is correct, Jess. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add something
Yes.
to that? So
Yeah.
one thing with Asperger's is that even when you learn and you can go in a social environment, whether at school or as an adult out to a party, and you can hold it together, and I like to use that term, it requires a lot of energy, And if you have a child and they're holding it together all day long at school, they're going to come home and they're not going to be able to hold it in anymore, and things. So it's not just children. It could be an adult. It could be, with a dog. If you do train them or give them the coping skills to behave in a more neurotypical way with other dogs or in the family group, it might really be taxing for them, and you have to give them some extra time and space to cope with that.
Yeah.
I've noticed he sleeps a hell of a lot more than any of my other dogs. I mean, he puts himself in timeout and he sleeps more. He's more tired than any other dog that I have, and I have 5.
Yeah,
so.
I 100% agree with what Wayne said, and I kind of feel like as Aspies, we're professional mimics, and so we're in the office all day, being a neurotypical person. Very few people know that I have Asperger's, and that's only because I told them, and they said I never would have guessed. And I said, well, I've been mimicking the world for 41 years. So, I'm a professional mimic at this point. But you can only keep that up for so long. And when I get home, that's all gone, and I am 100% an adult with Asperger's. And I think for dogs, it's the same way, especially, I don't know, do you take Slinky out and about town? Like if you're running errands, do you take Slinky in the car?
Yeah, we have certain limited range of motion. We can, it's not like having a normal dog.
Yeah, I have one. Roman said to me today, take your dog for a walk. I said, she can't go for a walk. She can barely go into the front yard. But, and that's the thing. When I would take my dog into the front yard for practice, and she'd be great. And, maybe we'd be out there for 30 minutes. That was all she could take. And then she had to come inside and be herself, because it takes so much mental energy, and being around the other dogs takes so much mental energy, and it's so taxing emotionally. She does sleep a lot, especially after we've had a big activity or a change in the schedule. It takes a lot out of them, and it takes a lot out of a person too.
Yeah. We go for a walk in the mornings, and we go as early as we don't meet any other people, because people outside is kind of the trigger. And 5:30, 6 in the morning, and then usually he's tired after that. He's like this stimulation. You can see my other dogs walk along and have their walk, and Slinky's like,
yeah, it's too much.
Like it's too much, and I feel sorry. So we go to the dog park, but also early. So we meet one other dog, and I can manage that. But it's really challenging.
Oh, sorry.
But it's.
I was going to ask if you guys are familiar with spoon theory. Have you heard of spoon theory? So spoon theory, I first found out about it when I was diagnosed with Asperger's maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. I learned about spoon theory, and basically what it says is when you wake up in the morning, you've got a bunch of spoons. Pretend these are spoons. And when there's information overload, get rid of one spoon. You ran out of a spoon. And if maybe you're stuck in an elevator in the morning and everybody wants to make small talk, that's another spoon. Get rid of it. So as the day goes on, you're losing spoons until you have no more spoons, and that's when a meltdown occurs. And I started applying that to my dog. saying, okay, we wake up in the morning and we've got 10 spoons. And I'm going to try to make this day as good for Maple as I can so that she's got at least one spoon left by the end of the day. My goal for her and for me is to keep as many spoons as I can. And that means for Maple, setting her up to succeed. And it means for me, avoiding the guy at the end of my row who likes to throw boxes because he's that guy at the end of the row that throws boxes. That's how I keep my spoons. And I think spoon theory is great, and I think we can apply it to animals a lot, and especially
like
the
the
animals
idea.
like people and like Slinky. How do we keep our spoons? What do we need to do?
Yeah. So he has a limited repertoire, I call it. You know, I can take Nelson and we can go meet another dog, and Nelson gets great and has a good time, eats a cappuccino. And with Slinky, it's just a very ritualic day. You know, he has his rituals, and it's very the same every day, and that's what he can handle. And so in a way, I treated it this way the whole time I had him, but I wouldn't call it AS because I didn't know. So it's quite interesting
Having a
for me to hear all
schedule
this.
is important for all dogs, but some dogs really can't live without it. They can't cope with the world without that schedule. And like my household would be an abductor's dream because we do the same thing every single day at the same time, down to eating the same food. If one little thing changes, it's going to be a bad day. So, you know, it's so important. And we went to see a show Thursday night, which meant Maple had to go into her crate at 6 o'clock Thursday night. And I was watching that poor dog on the security camera. It was not good. She couldn't handle it. But on Sundays, we do our grocery shopping at the same time every Sunday. She's getting better with it. But putting her into the crate Thursday night, you would have thought, you know, she was being killed.
Okay. So do we agree that dogs have limited capacity of emotional energy? After drain, a meltdown may occur. This is correct. Okay.
Yes,
So
that's correct.
the solution would be recognize how much energy the dog has left and how to keep it in highest level. And if you see they're going about to drain, break it off and calm him down until his battery charges, which in that particular dog takes longer to recharge than other dogs. And Martina's dog needs sleep longer. Is this correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Wayne, do you have something to add?
Well, I have another question. So with people, you have with people with Asperger's, you have a lack of affect, right? So if you turn that into to interpret in dogs' behavior, you want to have you want to get to know and bond with your dog and get to know their, it's a dance, right? You're having to learn their way of communicating. Now, this could be a dual question. If the person has Asperger's but the dog does not, how do they then interpret your cues? Perhaps they're more in tune with so much more, right? The visual cues of watching your face doesn't really matter. But then if you look at a dog, dog with Asperger's, does the dog have a lack of affect? And then, how do you start to read that dog?
I will say my dog absolutely had a lack of affect. And we're working with a behaviorist. We actually taught her how to dog, how to give the social cues, how to read the social cues. And I mean, it's still a work in progress, and it was a slow, it was definitely a slow road, but we had to teach her, and she grew up with, in those formative months when they really need the adult dogs around, she grew up with dogs that are great at social cues and taught her everything they knew. And she just couldn't understand. And she never quite got it. And so we worked with a behaviorist and specifically taught her how to be a dog and how to understand other dogs. But we really had to concentrate on that, and it was not easy because she just didn't get it.
And are they doing it through mimicry?
Mimicry, and feedback from the other dogs, from us, from being rewarded when she got it right, to let her know that, yep, that was it. You understood. You said the right thing to that guy. And I mean, it was daily. It was daily, doing it over and over and over and over. And, it's kind of like, it's what I do, when I'm learning to mimic people and how to act in a particular situation. And I still mess up. I mess up all the time. People think I'm very entertaining, and my dog still messes up.
Good. So let's recap a little bit. Martina, what did you learn from that webinar here? What was your highest wow thing?
Well, I was thinking, I'm still trying to figure out how much of the trauma, what is what, he could have been born with Asperger's, and because he had all this weird crud going on, he ended up at the shelter, right? And that's why he was on the kill list on Christmas. And, so what, the chicken and the egg thing? So, my question is, are dogs born with Asperger's? Could it be? Could we do some biological research to, look into this?
I think that if it is Asperger's, yes, they're born with it, because Asperger's and autism, it's something you're born with. It's not something that you get. It's not a disease. It's not something you catch. It's not something that's caused by brain trauma. It's just there.
Right.
But
so he could have been essentially having that, and then because of all this odd behavior, he ended up at the kill list. And then I picked him up, and now people, of course, say, well, he got traumatized at the shelter. So it's kind of like he has pretty much what you guys describe. And so it gives me hope that, it's not necessarily all trauma, and it's just coping. Because if it would be trauma, I had a chance to undo it. I've tried very, very, very hard with this dog to undo it. And in general, I've done over 400. I can undo stuff. And so with this boy, it's like, yep, that's the way he is. And always going to be. And it's, it gives me hope, though, that...
when you say trauma, think about it this way. It may not necessarily be what we think of as trauma. It may be that overstimulation, that information overload, which for a person with Asperger's is traumatic in that moment, because it's just too much, and the sounds, the smell, the sights, just everything going on, and sometimes even too much clothes, so in that moment it's a little bit traumatizing, but it's not a trauma. So I think, think about that, he may have experienced some kind of trauma, but being in the shelter is traumatic for all dogs in that it's a scary, loud place. But for a dog like Slinky, it's just that much more difficult to deal with, because he doesn't have the ability to process all that different information. And that's one of the reasons he probably puts himself away, because when you do get overexcited, when there is too much information, you need to process that. So you need to go someplace quiet with as little stimulation as possible to just kind of process what you just took in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very true. I mean, I can see clearer parallels of his behavior and the behavior of a child. It's just that I think our mechanisms to help a child are better is what I'm learning and listening. And so we don't, perhaps we may not need as much help because dogs live in the now and they don't, I can't tell Slinky, well, your dog friends think you're a dork. I think that. Slinky knows nothing about it. He plays. He has a good time. So does everybody else because they know him.
So
But put a new dog in there.
slowly. We hit already an hour. So Jess, was there something that you learned that you didn't know about? Was something that you could kind of better understand?
It's good to hear other people talking about their dogs that display Asperger's like symptoms. And because it's another person who knows what that's like because it's difficult. But I did want to mention, Roman, I know you've read Temple Grandin's work, but if there's anybody who has not read Temple Grandin, she's a scientist with autism, and she has basically reshaped the slaughter industry in the U.S. to make it as stressless as possible for the animals. And she actually, one of her books, I can't remember which one it is, talks about that autistic children see the world as animals do. So rather than seeing a tree, dogs are going to see a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, a piece of bark. They see all these little pieces. And that's similar, I think, to how I see the world sometimes, especially when that information overload is coming in. I see a million little different pieces, but I can't make that big picture. I need to step back and process. So I think her books are very, very interesting. And I think anybody who's interested in that subject should check out some of her books.
Yep, I agree. So, Wade, what was your feedback here? What did you learn?
Well, a much greater understanding as to how this may present in dogs, and it's always good to share these stories and information with people who have Asperger's themselves, because I think Jess already said it. It's a stigma, and it's something that we live with, and we pretend all day long, and we don't share it quite often as adults, especially with other people. I'd like to share a story, actually, just because it's a little bit empowering, I think it'd be a real cool idea if you could do it with dogs as well. My son got the opportunity to go to Camp Determination. It's right on the border between Kansas City and Missouri, and it's essentially an Asperger camp. And my son is very high functioning, and a lot of the kids that went there were very low functioning. I really, for a couple of years, couldn't understand why he really wanted to go there. And I went there, and at the end, it's like a normal camp. You have, they do skits and acts, and they have a good time. And the fundamental thing is, he went there because for a week he could be himself. So what if you had a dog park where non-neurotypical dogs could just go and just be non-neurotypical, and everybody was okay with that?
My dog would kill someone.
That'd be great.
So
I wish that kind of camp was around when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as Asperger's.
So how do we create a camp for Asperger's dogs? Will be my closing question. So maybe you want to email me about your ideas. Okay.
We should make another seminar out of this. How could we help these dogs? They're the ones that got killed in the shelter. I mean, Indigo, you got Indigo. Probably has it. So
So one
It's
thing
really
that
good for the
I
dogs and
recognize
kids, I believe.
from my
They can't
experience in
connect.
energy work, you cannot eliminate the condition, you can make the dog feel better around it. The most important part is water, fresh water, healthy nutrition, proper exercise, low stimulation. I would add energy work like Reiki healing, add crystal therapy to reinforce the dog, the healing process, these missing pieces from his DNA that make him be that way. Okay? But at the same time, I would like to trigger owners who have dogs with Asperger's, look around them and see if they feel the same way. Maybe there is a message there. A dog with Asperger's reflects something to the owner. Maybe the owner should look to that.
So, and Roman, you said something that reminded me of something that Martina might find interesting. You mentioned good nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
On the autism spectrum, you find a lot of digestive issues and allergies. So when it comes to Slinky, and I'm ashamed that it took me 6 years to figure this out in my dog. A lot of her bad behavior was caused because it turns out she's allergic to poultry.
Yeah.
And it was affecting her mentally.
Yes.
And it's very common with Asperger's and with autism to have allergies and the symptoms to be kind of a mental cloud and confusion. So that might be something with Slinky, is maybe do some food trials and see if she might have an allergy, and removing that food will help clear him up a little. Is it him or her? Him? It's a boy. Yeah. So, because I did find with myself, when I figured out what dairy was doing to me and I took dairy out of my diet, I was like, I am a new person. And when I took poultry out of my dog's diet, she was a new dog, because that cloud and that confusion just goes away.
I absolutely agree with Jess on that. And it's not,
It definitely.
if you know, on that end, the not so problematic, it can be just a cloud, but sometimes it can, in children, just really set them off. And it could be gluten, it could be yeast, it could be anything.
So, and I think for any dog that has AS, that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep, I agree.
I cooked for a while myself, and so it was a lot better. But it's
I bet.
To cook 6 stuff. So, but it for a while I did it like a half a year early in the beginning.
Yeah, so you
and
may do some food trials and see if you can figure out if there's a protein or a grain that's bothering him.
Yep. Limited ingredient.
Yes.
That's what we're on. Well, I appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I learned quite a bit on.
The first thing I do when I have dogs come from a rescue to eliminate as much stress as possible, the first thing I do, and I post it here right now, is removing internal stress. And removing internal stress is basically 30% of a dog's stress level that comes from a shelter. So if I remove everything else and the dog is still stressed, 30% of field stress is food. Bad grains, bad carbs, low nutrition factors. Of course, allergen reductions. You want to remove the allergens out of it. Cleansing the guts. If the guts is not clean, everything starts from there. If I don't have my processing factory clean, I will not be able to process food. And if I don't have my proper bacteria, I will not be able to digest my food at the first stage. I've seen many dogs who come from a shelter or stress situations. Most of the dog have chronic dehydration. And chronic dehydration basically toxifies the brain because the water is not able to reduce the toxins made in the brain. The problem is the dogs are freshwater animals, meaning we cannot give the dogs chlorinated water. It's processed water, and the dogs will not be able to process that. They are so sensitive in the molecular structure of the water. So you have a very thin water that will come, for example, from a well, that is, the molecules are so grinded down to the minimum small amount and carrying so much nutrition. But if the molecule water stands too long, these molecules stick together to bigger clusters because water is crystal. So we should see it as a crystal just in a liquid form. So the longer a crystal stays amorph, the bigger clusters it gets. Okay? So imagine yourself being at the beach and seeing all these gravel stones, how easy it is to sink in it. And imagine you're sitting on the street on a huge rock. It's like too big to process. Okay? So reducing allergens, try to get fresh water so the brain is flushed out and get the toxins out. The same thing happens also with the digestive system, increasing nutritional processors, for example, probiotics, and not the packaged probiotics that are processed. I mean, real culture, life cultures. And just an example, kefir has 80 billion probiotics available. A package has maybe 12 millions, which is not enough for the dog, who has basically a mess in the stomach. And then making sure the dog has always fresh water, reducing the external stress, where you mentioned before, that with these stress capacitors are reduced, the dog will not be able to process anymore. It will shut down and basically fall in coma, kind of going into these panic attacks, and give them more time to sleep. I think that's what I got from the whole thing here. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone. Jess and Martina and Wayne and Martin, if Martin was his name, right?
Yes.
I think we should do another one later, maybe in a few weeks, and discuss. And I would say, let's focus on feeding, Martina. Let's focus on the feeding procedure. Come up with a feeding plan, and I'll add also crystal therapy and Reiki and see, as is condition now, and what happens in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. What can we change?
Let's try.
Here? Okay.
I want to help. So I mean, yeah, I love it. Yeah, he'll get better after all.
Yeah. Okay then. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Don't we have in 2 hours, basically at 5. That's in an hour. We have the webinar for deaf people. So we have basic classic training session for deaf people who do not have the ability to hire a trainer because there's a communication barrier. Okay, so thank you so much, guys.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Jen.
Good. That was awesome. Wayne, you agree with that?
Hello? Now,
Yes, can you hear me?
yeah, no, it's a wonderful, wonderful webinar.
Good, perfect. Okay, we'll talk about it. Talk to you soon.
Hello.
Great, thank you.
Bye-bye.